Welcome to Power Your Profits podcast, your friendly guide in bringing your business revenue to the next level. Listen as host Susie Carder hears inspiring stories of success from her fellow entrepreneurs and transformational leaders. Prepare to make significant change to your strategies as they unravel the secrets of building multi-million-dollar businesses and the most effective tips on finance, marketing, and sales accountability. If you want to make your first step towards explosive business growth, this is the right podcast for you. Without further ado, here is your host, Susie.
Mark Graban is an author, speaker, podcaster, and consultant. His most recent book, Measure of Success, React Less, Lead Better, Improve More. He's been in podcasting for 15 years, and his newest series is called My Favorite Mistake. He has 2 master's degrees from MIT Engineering and MBA. Welcome to the show, my good friend, Mark. Welcome to Power Your Profit podcast. I'm so excited, Mark. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so I always ask my guests, I did your official bio, but I want to hear your badass list. Like, I want to hear why we should listen, we should pay attention to you. Tell them, my brother, give me kind of the scoop. Let's share what are all I know it's hard to brag about ourselves, but this is the fun part for me. As you go, oh, okay, so share with us, what is my brother's badass list?
All right, so I guess that list of credentials or accomplishments, I went to undergraduate at Northwestern University. I don't think I would get admitted there today as the school 30 years. It's been 30 years since I stepped on campus as a freshman. It's gotten so much more competitive. So I am fortunate that I had a chance to go there. I had an opportunity, a really great opportunity to attend grad school at MIT, where you might have mentioned already, but I earned 2 degrees, master's in mechanical engineering and an MBA. I have probably something you did not mention. I have two US patents.
Okay.
That was not easy to say. 2 US patents from my time working at Dell Computers. So that's kind of cool. I've written and published 4 books, 2 of which are award winners from an organization called the Shingo Institute, which is important in my professional circles. And I've been involved in 2 different startup companies, and that might be one of the topics today. One of them, I'm wearing the shirt, a software company called KaiNexus. I wasn't a co-founder, but I was the 3rd person involved working with the 2 co-founders who are awesome. And that has grown to a multi-million-dollar business.
That's exciting. So tell everybody, who do you serve? What's your niche? What's your secret sauce?
So, the specialty, the niche, that I would define a lot of the work I do is a methodology that comes out of Toyota. I started in the automotive industry, so people might refer to it as the Toyota production system, or more broadly, lean manufacturing. And then after about 10 years focused in the manufacturing realm, my career took this weird detour where I had this opportunity to start doing similar consulting work in healthcare, applying the same, as we call it again, lean methodology to healthcare. So that's, I've served hospital systems, healthcare organizations, haven't been able to travel for that the last 1.5 years. So my world has changed a little bit. Try to support organizations virtually. I do a lot of work with that software company, KaiNexus, like I mentioned, part-time. And I'm also affiliated with a consulting firm called Value Capture, which does healthcare improvement work.
Awesome. Yeah. So share with me, what would you say that so many people, you mentioned it a little bit, everybody's business has pivoted because of the pandemic and COVID. What's been your strategy to staying in action and growing?
Yeah, I'm staying busy and active. Quite honestly, my revenue has taken a hit the last 2 years, just a little bit downward, which is not great, but managed to pivot enough where, I'm doing fine. There are a lot of people who are really hurting. I'm thankfully not really hurting. So there's been a pivot to try to do some work virtually, whether that's coaching clients, virtual speaking engagements. I think I've got my first in-person session again lined up for December, and hopefully that remains an in-person session because I'm ready to do that. And I think we can, I can be safe doing that. So some of it's been pivoting of what I normally do into a virtual space. I've taken a lot of people have used the pandemic to write a book. I wasn't yet in the new book mode, so I've taken a deeper dive into podcasting.
Yeah.
And so one of those is through the organization Value Capture. It's a podcast called Habitual Excellence. And so now that's where, instead of podcasting as a hobby, I can get paid to do that podcast. And then I started a new podcast series purely for fun and professional networking that you were a guest on, Susie, a podcast called My Favorite Mistake. So that's been a lot of fun. And then the other pivot is combining, I think my writing experience and some marketing work. I wouldn't call myself a professional marketer, but between podcasting and website skills, I've been in a role for the firm Value Capture. We're calling a director of strategic marketing. So I've led a website overhaul. We're adopting a new marketing system with a company called HubSpot. So we're using their software and their inbound marketing or content marketing methodology. So, it's I do a lot of different things, and that's fun.
And so what would you say, running two podcasts and really focusing your time on this, what do you think has been, because a lot of people have podcasts, you've been doing it for 15 years, so that you've got a secret sauce around that. And I think a lot of our listeners, this would be a juicy conversation. What would you say, like, your learning lessons have been, like what you did wrong, what you did right? Kind of my favorite mistake in this whole realm of starting a podcast, because I think that, a lot of people have them, but they're not getting traction or listeners, or what's your secret sauce around that?
Well, so the first podcast I started back in 2006 was sort of an extension of my blog, leanblog.org. So the podcast has a clunky name. It's Lean Blog Interviews. It's probably not what I would name it if I started it today, but that one's built up the biggest audience. I think it was partly an advantage of being kind of an early mover with podcasts in my niche. And then some of it's a function of just sticking with it. You gain subscribers and followers over time. The podcasts that I've started in the last couple of years, in the last 2 years, followed a similar track where I think sometimes you just have to be patient and stick with it. And, maybe we can talk about this more. I've tried to do some creative things to help promote the podcast through being a guest on other people's podcasts. I do use a PR firm that kind of specializes in booking radio interviews. So trying to tap into an audience like that. But back to the part of your question about mistakes, my goodness, I make mistakes all the time. Only one time, and I don't know if these are favorites, but like the biggest mistake I think I made podcast wise was literally forgetting to hit record.
Oh, I hate
when I did a 30-minute episode, and I'm the type of person where I wasn't going to blame some mysterious technical glitch, I just fessed up to the guest, basically saying, I screwed up.
Right.
Forgive me. I'm sorry. They were very gracious about it. And I can't even remember. I should remember who it was, because they were incredibly gracious about it. But they said basically, well, you know what? We'll just call that a practice session. Let's do it again.
Right.
And
that's awesome.
That was great of them. Now, one time I do remember, this was the author, Eric Ries, the author of the book, The Lean Startup. We did a podcast. I recorded it. And this is back in the days when I was on a Windows laptop. And like quite literally the night after I recorded it, I had a hard drive crash. Not my fault. It lost the episode. So, and Eric again was kind enough to say, yeah, we'll re-record it. But my lesson learned, and here's the thing that I'm not going to fall back into again, is always have backups.
Right.
I'm on Mac. So I've got a system called online service called Backblaze, which is continually, constantly updating, backing up to the cloud. And I use Time Machine, and I often store files in either the iCloud or Dropbox. So it's like belt and suspenders and another belt now. Like I don't want to lose those files. So that was embarrassing. But I think there's this theme of my favorite mistake of, like, I think when you admit your mistake and you figure out, like, I'm going to avoid, you can tell someone not just, hey, I screwed up, but here's what I've learned from it. Right. I think people are really gracious, generally speaking.
Well, when you fall on the sword, right, versus making up some excuse or story, because it happens, right? It happens in business, it happens in life. And when we try to be that perfectionist of trying to get it right all the time, that's not realistic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you say currently, or in the past, like those are great podcast mistakes, but what's been I always call these the cosmic boot, life lessons, some people call them failures. Has been the biggest one that you've had in your business? And then how did you pivot from it, or what did you do to come over it? So what was the lesson? And then what did you learn from it?
Yeah, the biggest screw up. It's hard to think of one that's huge. I mean, like I'm quite aware of the mistakes that I make constantly.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the lessons is that learning from small mistakes helps prevent huge mistakes. Like when you were on My Favorite Mistake, Susie, you were very forthcoming about your real estate investing mistakes, and like I appreciate that.
That was a crash.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you were willing to share that, as other people have on the show. But like, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I think there's this point of making small mistakes and learning from them. So like one thing that I use, like I try to follow a good process and being organized and structured and having different checklists that I follow for planning episodes, tracking with the guests, going through the things I need to do to release the episode. Using the checklist, I wouldn't say that helps me be perfect, but it helps me avoid repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So I thankfully I haven't had a business really crater. The last 2 years has been, a speed bump, just given the way things go. But I think even like if you think of the company, the software company KaiNexus, that like any startup has ups and downs. But I think with the culture that Greg and Matt, the co-founders, have built, and I've tried to help them with, is a culture of learning from mistakes. Like, don't create an environment where people hide or cover up mistakes. Like if it's a simple human error, if it's a mistake that's never been made and you couldn't anticipate it, it's not a culture that blames people or jumps down their throats. And so I think that's the key to having like a good, healthy, resilient culture and business. Now, I'm usually harder on myself than anybody else is on me, so I have to be careful about that.
I think that's a great leadership example, right? You just saying that is to go, well, there's challenges in the business, right? What did we learn from it? And you always talk about leaders need to react less and lead better, right? Mm-hmm. And improve more. Share more about that. Like what's important inside of that context that you want to share with us.
Yeah, so I'm gonna hold up a copy of the book. Kind of you to bring this up. So this is my most recent book that I wrote and self-published. I'd done previous books through a traditional publisher, but the subtitle of the book, subtitle of Measures of Success, is React Less, Lead Better, Improve More. And the roller coaster imagery on the cover, yeah, I mean, there are going to be ups and downs, but the lesson is kind of like get off the roller coaster, the proverbial emotional roller coaster where leaders are reacting or overreacting to every up and down in some business metric. That is a lot of times just ends up being wasted time. That's distraction from really improving the business. So, the subtitle doesn't say never react, but there's a methodology that I was fortunate to learn and I've used in my career and I'm passing along in the book, a methodology called process behavior charts that allows you to not just chart your business metric, but to basically, calculate some guardrails around that metric to help you understand, like, is that most recent data point just noise in the metric? Or is it an outlier? Or we could use the word signal. It's like, I'm going to hold up an example to the camera. Here's an example of that chart, a serious issue from a hospital, surgical deaths. And well, those numbers are fluctuating around an average. They're fluctuating within those calculated red lines. So that would tell me, or I would tell the leader, like, don't ask why last month was worse than the month before in that case.
Yeah.
But, so when we replace the reaction, the explanation of last month's data point we can instead step back and say, well, why is the average death rate this? And how do we improve systems that would reduce post-operative deaths? Like that's a different thought process than, hey, explain the last data point.
Right. What can we improve upon it? Right. So we always look at what did we love, and then what's 3 things we like, what's 1 thing we can improve upon. So that we're always, whether it's a training, whether it's a sales call, whether it's, last year or this year, this quarter over last quarter, this month in our plan and reviews, this month over last month, simple, clean, because I find that people know the areas that they need to improve upon. And when I start saying you need to improve upon this, I just am met with resistance. So really allowing them to just share, oh, here's what I can improve upon. It's not what I did wrong, right? We're not putting blame, right? It's what can we improve upon to make that happen? What are some other data points when you look at your book that we should be measuring that maybe we don't know we should be measuring? Like the obvious ones, you're looking at growth, you're looking at clients, you're looking at profitability. We should be looking at profitability. I'm just saying that out loud, everybody.
Yeah.
What do you
think?
I mean,
like when I think of my own business, when I go and teach workshops about this methodology, I have a survey form at the end of the day. So there are both numerical scores and free form feedback. Like I think you can't rely on numerical scores alone. You want to invite constructive criticism, or you want to hear in people's own words what went well. So if I've done 10 workshops over a period of time, I'll look at the score for each workshop. Now, let's say the previous workshop, the average score was 4.8 out of 5. And now I do this next workshop pretty much the same way. Like I try to improve the workshop based on feedback from before. But I figure the workshop's good. It doesn't need overhauling. People were generally happy. But then the next time the average score is 4.65. Like that doesn't mean now the workshop's terrible. Like that difference between 4.8 and 4.65, when I plot the last 10 workshops, I said, well, you know what? The average score is 4.72.
Right.
Sometimes you're going to be better than average, sometimes below average. But so if I've calculated those red lines, those guardrails, those limits, and let's say the lower limit was 4.2. Well, then if I did a workshop where, let's say I flew in the night before, my flight was really delayed, I was tired, I wasn't on top of my game, and the average score that day was 4.1. It could be like, well, I wasn't on my game that day. Right. Lesson learned is don't take the last flight of the day, or if it gets delayed, I land at 2 a.m. Like, that could be the cause and effect between what happened and why I got the low score. But this kind of final point I'll make, I did a workshop in the Netherlands, and there was a survey, and the average score was a lot lower. But one of the hosts had said, hey, just so you know, like the Dutch satisfaction scores are just always lower than they would be in the United
They're harder.
States.
They don't laugh at my jokes. That's what I figured out. It's like, why are you gonna think I'm funny?
Yeah, the Dutch are direct and they're blunt, and that's great. Like, but as long as you're prepared for it. So I would say, getting a low score from a Dutch audience, again, I would say, like, don't overreact to that. It could be, again, like the context is they're tough graders, like a professor might be. Right.
Well, and then you look at, because we did the same thing, in the beginning of my career, I would just go to the people that didn't like me. What did I do wrong? Like, okay, you have 99% of everybody that loves you. Let's put it in context. It could be that person. It could be, versus like, woe's me, my life is over. They don't like me. Whatever. You can't please everybody. Right?
I was just going to say, you can't please everybody. Sometimes you have to, whether it's feedback about a book or a workshop or something, sometimes you need to say, well, okay, I'm going to just discount what they said. Like, maybe the context of like, somebody's boss made them go to a workshop. They didn't want to be there, and they were just ticked off and grumbly, and maybe they take it out on you in the score. But I think you raised a really good point, Susie. I like to do, after a meeting or a workshop or something, plus delta, or you could say plus minus, like what went well, what could have been better, the delta, or like, well, what was the gap between what you wanted and what happened? That's maybe a polite way of saying, plus minus, what went well, because you often need to make sure you do more of what made people happy.
Right.
And not just fix the problems that people maybe complained about.
I love that. And I love that, we're talking about data, and you graduated from MIT. Most entrepreneurs did not, but it's not data that it's so entrenched. It's let's look at data that's going to serve you in this business, right? I used to be a very emotional leader, and I'd want to just fire everybody because we really started doing data points. It's like, well, everybody loves that person. And so just because they don't work the same way you work doesn't mean we get rid of them. Like, really learn to appreciate people's differences. And I've learned through data points is to go, oh, that's just my personal preference. It doesn't necessarily mean what my consumer is thinking of. So it's so important. So show the book again, Mark, because I think it's important to really look at how do you dissect it? How do you get some data to run your business? Not all data points, right? But just pull the meat from the book that allows you to make that change in your business. How do we get the book?
It's available through Amazon, both as a paperback book and through Kindle. The book's website is measuresofsuccessbook.com if people want to download the first chapter. And there's all kinds of free resources available there on the website. So like a lot of authors, I mean, sure, I would love it if people buy the book. Better yet is if they read it and then put it to use.
Implement it, right.
But, like a lot of books, there's a passion here around this methodology that I've found to be so useful, what we call, again, these process behavior charts. If people go to the book's website, measuresofsuccessbook.com, and watch the free webinars that I've done and read the articles, and there's a spreadsheet template, like, if you can go make use of this methodology without reading the book, that's good too. I would consider that a happy outcome as well.
Right. We just want you to start measuring. We want you to just start taking action. So is there one question you wish I would have asked you that that entrepreneurs need to hear inside their business or even their life, right? When you look at having holistic success.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are related questions around metrics. One question people always ask, like, well, what should I measure? Well, that's hard for me to say, but I think there are some general tips, like, measuring more things isn't always more helpful. So I think sometimes you've got to have that discussion. Or one point I try to make in the book is, KPIs. It stands for key performance indicators, not cajillion performance indicators, right? So you can get lost in this flood of data of like, well, I've got my quote unquote executive dashboard with 97 metrics on it. Like, well, wait a minute, look at your car's dashboard.
Right.
It does not display 97 different things. Like, the key things are your speed and how much range is left, whether it's a gas tank or an electric vehicle, right? Now, there are probably hundreds of things being measured in real time, being stored in your vehicle's onboard computer. You as the driver don't need to be overwhelmed with all of that. So sometimes you do need to take a deeper dive into data, but I recommend to business leaders, think about like measuring your own health. Like, there are literally hundreds of laboratory tests and measures about your body and its condition. Right. But different people, you may have a couple of key numbers. Most people look at the number on the scale, but weight is just one measure, right? That's not always an indicator of fitness. Let's say in my family, there's a history of type 2 diabetes. So measures around blood sugar are important because I would rather try to prevent diabetes than end up taking insulin every day.
Right.
So those key metrics might be different for different people. And I think back to business, when you think of like, what are the key health measures for our business related to cash flow, customer acquisition, customer satisfaction, leading to profitability as an end result. But profit is just one number, kind of like the weight on the scale is just one number. So I think that's a key thing. Like, don't measure too many things. And when we're measuring too many things, and then if we're then overreacting to every up and down in all of those measures, our heads will be spinning, and it ends up being a distraction instead of being something that helps us run the business better.
All right. So go to measuresofsuccessbook.com. Go order the book and get the bonuses, right? We want to get all the bonuses that you have and the free webinars. So go check it out. So let's look at what gets measured gets done. We know that. What gets reported excels. We know that as well. So thank you, Mark, for your genius today. Thank you for serving us today. Thank you for your generosity. We appreciate you. And we'll put all this in the show notes. So in case you didn't write that down fast enough from when Mark showed it and I showed it, if you love this episode, please like and share with your community or your tribe to help us stay more focused on business and power that profit inside of your business so that you have the fuel to keep doing what you want to do. Mark, thank you so much. Have a blessed day. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you serving our community.
Well, thank you, Susie. It's great to talk to you again, and thanks for turning the tables and interviewing me. This has been fun.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Power Your Profits podcast. Let these building blocks from today's most successful industry leaders equip you with the necessary resources and tools to finally establish the highly profitable business of your dreams. Want to hear more? Listen to more episodes at https://poweryourprofitspodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show. Now is your time to rise to the top of your game, so be sure to catch our next episode. Until next time.